Colorado. I am a BYU alum, so we kind of bounce it up. So I did my bachelor's and master's here. So I know Brandon kind of touched about the importance of an internship. Unfortunately for me, I graduated in my undergrad in 2011 and then my master's in 2012. So that was kind of the downturn of the economy. But the master's is an alternative route to give you that great opportunities to expand your knowledge and get into the workforce. So I focus a lot on transportation planning and traffic operations. After graduating from BYU, I actually moved to the California office and just recently moved back to here in Utah. And so what I mostly do with my work is a lot of what you learn in Dr. Schultz's 361 class of all that trip gen and assignments and all of that fun stuff. So basically we just, I do more planning, a lot more report writing to help cities and developers kind of plan for new developments in the city. So as we kind of alluded earlier, today we want to kind of focus about the project life cycle. So both Brandon and I, we work with different types of clients on the public side with cities and counties and other municipalities, and then also on the private side with private developers. But overall, all of our projects follow this big general life cycle. So first at the top, we kind of do a lot of marketing and when actually get the project. Then we have to go and actually do our develop a scope, fee, and contract for those projects. Then we actually produce the submittal, whether that be a report, plan sets, meetings, whatever that was. And then throughout that process, we also need to make sure that we we manage the projects in terms of the people working on it, as well as the financials. And then lastly, towards the end, once the plan sets are submitted and we get approval from the city that we can go and construct it, we assist with that, and then we also kind of close that out. So the first step, before we can actually start on the project, we have to win it. So what does that mean? So before we win a project or even know that it's happening, it's really important to talk and build your network. I think there's a lot of announcements of all these great professional society events that you guys can attend to. It's a great opportunity for you now to meet all of these engineers, because you never know, as I've grown through my career, and I've only been working for 6 years, of how you will cross paths with your classmates or maybe some of your TAs or even your professors later down the road. And so talking and getting information about what's going on will help you kind of know what's coming up. And once you know that information, what we usually do is put together a proposal. So for the public side, a lot of these things are funded, so usually cities will send out what's called a request for proposal. So that's kind of like an example of the cover of one. Or on the private side, you might have just an email of a client kind of asking you, hey, I have this development coming in, can you just check on this information? And so once you just get either this information of a proposal, so either an informal email or a request, we can put together a proposal. So if you look at the top, it's kind of our, for more the city ones, we have to put together this nice proposal. It kind of tells about your credentials, what projects you worked on, what you plan on doing, and then you submit it, and then they go for review. And then sometimes with the public, you might be asked to do an interview where they ask you certain questions with the agencies. And then Brandon can kind of give a little more insight on kind of how the proposals might go on the private side.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So the next slide here. Okay. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about just, I guess, the cradle to grave life cycle of the entitlement process and the design process for a project. So once we win the project, obviously we've got to produce. So there's a lot that goes into that. I'll kind of get into the details and then talk about, maybe the not so exciting part of it is, billing out your work and whatnot, but obviously you want to get paid for the work that you do. So once we are awarded the project, at least on the land development side, there's a lot of things that kind of come into play. So we typically do a bit of due diligence on the project, and that includes, so on a land development project, let's say, hey, we're going to be developing a greenfield site, which is just, let's say it was previously an agricultural field. So we go out there, we send out a geotechnical engineering firm that goes out and drills boreholes to identify what the strata looks like underneath that. And they put together a geotechnical report that gives us recommendations as to what we should do with, well, they give us an idea as to what we're dealing with soils, and so usually it will identify how much topsoil needs to be removed from the property, or just stored on the property that you can use for landscaping at a later date. It will identify just the conditions of the soils, whether a lot of times we'll find that there's undocumented fill that was brought in on the site. And in many of those instances, we essentially have to remove that undocumented fill and likely could recompact it and use it elsewhere on the site, but not knowing how that was placed, it was likely not placed properly and compacted properly. So, and then they'll give us asphalt and concrete sections, and then give the structural engineers guidelines as to how to design the foundations. So that's one. The other one is a survey. We go out and send out a surveyor. They'll go out and survey the boundary, identify any exceptions on the property, which would include easements, anything that could potentially impact the development. And then other things that typically may take place, just depending on the site, is a phase 1 environmental. So it just goes through and identifies what that property was used for over as far back as they can research, just to see if there's any environmental problems. If there was an underground storage tank, that's a red flag. That needs to be investigated and see if there were any tests done on that to confirm that there weren't any leaks. And then there may be a wetlands clearance that needs to be done on the property, whatnot. So we do all of this due diligence work, and then we start preparing what would be a conceptual site plan. So depending on what the client would like to see on the property, so I'm doing one up in Lehigh right now. It's an interesting project. It's a car vending machine. It's really cool. It's going to be a really exciting project where you essentially just buy your car online. You can choose from any of their cars that they have throughout the country. The one that you like, you pick. You actually do your loan and everything online. They deliver it to this car vending machine. They give you a big coin that you stick into a machine, and you watch your car come down, and you give delivery of that, and then you have 10 days to test drive it, and no questions asked. If you don't like your car, you just return it. So a pretty cool concept. We're doing that in Lehigh right now, and so we had to prepare a concept site plan that shows how this would fit on the property. And then we have to go meet with the city. And usually we'll have a pre-application meeting with the city where the city will identify, hey, these are the steps that you're going to have to take in order to get your project approved. And in many of those instances, that includes a site plan approval. It takes approval of your civil construction documents as well as the architectural plans, just everything that goes into a land development project, which is essentially civil engineering documents, landscape architecture documents. It could be a traffic impact study that's required, and that would be up in the due diligence side of things too. Structural, mechanical engineering plans, just everything that it takes to build that. So those get submitted sometimes. In this particular case in Lehigh, we actually had to rezone the property too, because as you can imagine, most city codes don't have anything like a car vending machine in code. I would say this is just one of a kind. So we actually had to rezone the property to an appropriate zone, but then we also had to amend the code and put language in there that would identify this type of a use. So we're just going through that process, and we'll go through what's called a planning commission meeting, where you go before a body that the city appoints of individuals that hear what you have to say. Generally, the the various staff members of the city will review your plans and then provide comments, and then they write up a staff report that goes to planning commission, and planning commission reviews it and essentially approves it. In some instances, those also have to go to city council, which is an elected body, and then ultimately the city council has the final say on whether a project is approved or not. So once you get through that process, sometimes you can be, the building department can be reviewing the architectural plans simultaneously. Other times, they won't let you start that until after you kind of get those initial entitlements through those various entities. So there's just, as you can imagine, there's a lot of documentation that goes into it that just creates this package that ultimately gets handed over to the client and ultimately the contractor that delivers that. So probably went through a lot of this already. Through the process, obviously, the city will have comments and we have to revise those. Sometimes the client will have comments, we have to revise as well. Sometimes we get into scenarios where we're doing value engineering. We design something, but there might be a more cost-effective way of doing something, so we're asked to do a value engineering study, see if there's alternatives out there to reduce costs. And I think I kind of went through most of that. So then it gets to, so as you're going through this, obviously you're managing the client. You're trying to manage the different jurisdictions that you're working with, and that could include the city, it could be a county, it could be UDOT, it could be dry utilities, which would be the power company, the gas company, the telephone company. So you're coordinating all these various entities and just trying to pull everything together such that everything ties in nicely. And then at the end of that, or throughout that, you're also starting to prepare invoices so that you can get paid for your work. And so generally, invoices, at least with Kimley Horn, we send them out on a monthly basis. So we track our time in a program called Time Collections. We have to track every 30 minutes of our time and put notes as to what that time is spent on, so that if there's any questions that come up, we can always refer back to that. So at the end of the month, we'll sit down with one of our accountants and we'll decide where we're at with regards to the project and how that compares to the proposal that we submitted. And for the most part, we're billing on percentages. So at the beginning of the project, the first month, we might only bill out 25% of various tasks because we're just right at the beginning. But towards the tail end of the project, we're likely sending out invoices that are 100% of the tasks that we've put forward.
All right, and so, when we do the proposals, we hope that we cover everything, but most of the time our project's just, as hard as we try to anticipate everything that happens, sometimes things just change. The client comes back and decides to redevelop. They no longer want to build a house there, they want to build like retail. or the city comes back and says, oh, we need to analyze this other part of the city for our traffic study. So when we, when instances of this happens, we always kind of, it takes more time, it's gonna cost us, so we have to make sure that we put together additional scope. And a lot of times, the clients understand in these cases that, you know, this was out of our initial understanding of the project, and it's always good to make sure you get paid for this additional stuff. So towards the end of the project, once the plans are reviewed, finalized, and approved, we could, yeah, you have a question?
What do you do if the client's not understanding and doesn't want to pay more?
So the client's not understanding, and that's kind of the struggle when we do project management. You know, one thing, as Brandon mentioned, we do keep track of our hours, and a lot of times we can pull that information and kind of hopefully show and demonstrate our client, you know, this is our scope, and that's the important of having the scope and contract written well, to where you can say, you know, in our contract, we budgeted for only 40 hours to complete this task, but with this new change, it ended up costing us doing, you know, 20 hours of rework. So it is something that there's no good answer or a way to kind of do that. It's just something you learn as you grow through your career.
Yeah, and I'll try to speak loud for this one. So ideally, as you're approaching, say it's just a completely new task, and it's obvious it's a completely new task, and the client's like, no, I'm not going to pay you for it. Well, obviously, we can't deliver that if we're not going to get paid for it. So it becomes kind of a negotiation. If it's a scenario where we've only budgeted 40 hours, and it's going to take us 60 hours, and it's kind of clear in our contract that says, hey, we estimate 40 hours, it could potentially be more than that, and we'll let you know. Ideally, you're having that conversation before you have your 41 back, right? You know, you want to be able to have that conversation so you're not backtracking, hey, we actually spent 60 or 70 hours on this. You want to inform the client before you get to them, so you avoid that headache of trying to negotiate through that.
Yeah, and throughout the process, hopefully you're keeping good communications with your client that they know what's going on. So towards the end, yeah, as I mentioned, there's a construction and closeout. So once they're being built, you'll typically assess the client or the city with helping answer if there's any inquiries from the contractor, if they have any questions about your plans, if they can use a substitution from what you specified of certain pipes or materials that you use. You'll also go and do site visits to make sure that whatever you design is being constructed properly. And then lastly, once hopefully everything's done and finished, we wrap things up by sending out our final invoices. We typically try to have a lessons learned meeting with all the parties involved. So there's, on some of these projects, we may be the civil, but there's also the architecture, there's other parties involved, and we're all working together, and we usually get together and say, you know, what worked well on this project, what didn't, what can we do in the future to improve on things. And then lastly, we also go and archive our information, and this is important because it's good to take notes. Sometimes, unfortunately, some things get into litigation where we have to come back later down the years and figure out why we decided to design the roadway a certain way, and it's important to make sure that we have good documentations to explain why.
Maybe I'll just expand a little bit on that as well. So maybe some of the other deliverables at Project Closeout, a lot of times we're seeing that cities are requiring as-built drawings to be prepared. So obviously during construction things change, right? So we document what has changed and have that on file. Both the city and everybody just gets a copy of those as-built drawings. So that's one thing that comes out. Also, kind of during the construction side of things, we are going out and doing field observations. we're starting to see where cities are requiring us to be the inspector. We're not, we don't like being the inspector, but if that's a requirement of the project, we'll do that. A lot of cities do have inspectors that go out and do that work, but we're starting to see a little bit of a turn here or change where cities are now saying, okay, engineer of record, you need to go out and inspect what you've designed, and you're gonna play inspector. So there's a little bit of that. Some of the other new things that are coming out as well is cities are requiring long-term maintenance plans and this is more specific to stormwater. So they're wanting to see documentation that actually ultimately gets signed by the client who's ultimately going to be operating that piece of property as to how they're going to be maintaining that storm drain system. And making sure that it's properly maintained, it's inspected after large rain events. And there's typically stormwater quality structures that are put in place with these type developments and making sure that those are properly maintained over time. So there's a lot of things kind of on the tail end of the project that we're starting to see come from city requirements now as well.
Great, and so with that, oh yeah, and then once we do that, we just start the whole process over again. Most of the time, we're actually working on multiple parts at a time. You know, we may have multiple projects and they're at different stages, but that's essentially it. So just to let you know, we will be back next week for our info session. So we hope to see you guys if you guys are interested in what we as at Kinley Horn, what we do and what we work on. We hope to see you. And then we also have our contact information, and we'll just use the remaining time if there's any questions.
So for marketing, do you guys normally just have repeat customers who enjoy the work that you do, or do you go out and have Google ads and try and do new clients? What ways do you guys target?
So I would say, great question. I'd say about 80% of our work is repeat clients, but obviously you have to build those clients. And as you're a growing company and you're adding people, you've got to add clients as well. And so it's attending the events that Elizabeth had talked to. So there's a lot of organizations out there, ULI, NAIOP, I'm sure there's some traffic-related ones, and you run into clients there. You're trying to find those networking events that can get you in front of the people that actually look for our services. And then it's also just networking with influencers. So in the land development industry, influencers can be contractors. So if you're establishing great relationships with contractors as they build your projects, many times clients will actually go directly to a contractor, or they'll start at the contractor level because they want to get a feel for what it's going to cost. And then they'll ask the contractor, hey, who's the firms that you would recommend that we go to potentially ask them to help us out. Also brokers. Our clients will typically go to brokers to help them find land, and brokers can influence clients to come our way. And sometimes cities will also, they got to be a little careful, but cities will get asked the questions from time to time, and it just depends on who they ask and whether they're comfortable in sharing that information. So that's a few ways. And then as we talked about in the beginning, a lot of times there'll be RFPs that come out, and they're sent out to multiple firms, and it's just kind of a hard bid type thing where you've got to make sure that your number looks good and you're well qualified for it, and they select from those bids. So does that answer your question? Yeah, go ahead.
Who usually does a lot of the quantity takeoffs? Do you guys do a lot of that, or is that mostly the contractor?
So many times we're asked to do cost estimates during the process, and so we generally do quantity takeoffs. In fact, a lot of times we're finding that the city wants various components of the project to be bonded So the event, there's been many instances where a development goes under construction and something happens with the project. Maybe the contractor goes bankrupt or the client goes bankrupt and you've got this unfinished site. And so you have to bond for the work that the city wants to make sure that, they're able to go in and finish up what work that is needed. And so we have to put together quantity takeoffs to kind of get through that bonding process, but ultimately it is the contractor's responsibility to do the final takeoffs and base their bid off of that. Yeah, go ahead.
If your project costs more than you bid, do you pay the difference?
Fortunately not. Well, so are you asking on the construction side or are you asking on the engineering side? So if we put together a cost estimate and that cost estimate, the construction cost ends up being higher, is that what you're saying? Do we pay the difference?
Yeah, we need.
I'll take on both scenarios there. So the industry is just crazy right now from the construction side of things. There's just a lot happening with the rebuild of the airport and the prison and whatnot, and the tariffs that are taking place. And so the construction costs are just going all over the place. And so when we do a cost estimate, it's kind of in that window of time. But we always put disclaimers in our cost estimate. Hey, that's what it is, it's a cost estimate. In fact, we call it opinion of probable cost. So clients generally don't hold us to that. They generally try to hold the contractor so they'll get a number from the contractor, and even that number will likely increase during the construction process for various things. And they're seeing that happen a lot now just due to shortage of labor, material costs are just fluctuating so bad. So generally, no, we don't have to pay, and sometimes it becomes a negotiation with the client and the contractor to figure out how they split those differences, or if the client just takes it all away.
Do you have architects that are part of your team?
We actually don't have architects, so we're all engineers and planners, landscape architects within our firm. But we have a lot of great relationships with architects, and they're influencers as well, so they can influence clients coming to us. So from the land development side of things, we design everything up to the building, and the architect takes over from there. We do have structural engineers in-house that will help with the vertical design and parking structures and things like that, and bridges. But we don't have any architects on staff that can.
You talked about how you have lessons learned meetings. Is that just a team work or is that what you guys?
I would say in general, it's a good practice that most owners will do. It's, things always change, right? And each project is never the same, so there's always different nuances that you always want to build upon, and that's just build upon what you've learned. And cities also want to make sure that if a project was over budget, why, and make sure that we don't do it again, especially since they have, the funds are coming from taxpayers and things like that.
So I would say that the best lessons learned meetings that I've gone to, you have all the different entities that have been involved with the project. So it's going to be the client, it's going to be the consultants, so we'd be a part of the consultants and then the contractor. And you just go through that. The contractor might be there on the tail end for the construction and be able to share some of the lessons learned from construction. Maybe, hey, if you would have designed it this way, it would have saved us X amount of dollars. From the client and consultant side of things, hey, client, if you would have given us a little heads up on this, a bit more in advance, we've been able to correct something. So it's really good to just get everybody's thoughts together and then obviously use those lessons to hopefully not rehab any type of those same issues down the road.
sometimes if the project's long enough, we might have interim lessons learned. So if it's a phased out project at the end of phase 1, we might have a lessons learned, say, we're about to start phase 2, what are things that we can move forward with? Okay. Any other questions? Anything in general? Doesn't have to be about the project life cycle. Anything about civil engineering?
What's been your favorite projects to work on?
That's a hard one. So part of my practice and what I do a little bit and what I've been kind of the niche market that I've been starting to get into is focus a lot about, in California, they have a program called Safe Route to School, where you go around and you kind of take a look at what are some obstacles or infrastructure improvements that you can make to encourage students to walk and bike to school a little bit more. So I enjoy that because you get to go and see how, walk around the school and get to see all these children and try to, encourage an active lifestyle. I know when I was growing up, I walked to school, and nowadays I feel like not as many kids do that. Another one is I do in ramp metering projects where we take a corridor and we implement ramp metering, and so that's really fun because you get to drive a lot. So as part of a lot of what I do a lot of traffic operations. So in order to improve a corridor, I actually have to drive in rush hour, which seems kind of counterintuitive of why someone would like driving in rush hour, but it's fun. You get to think a lot in your car and also learn more about the roadways that you're driving on.
So yeah, that's a hard one because I have a lot of favorite projects, but one that's close to home here. So probably around 2004 through 2008 in Sandy, there's a project called Quarry Bend. And it's in between 90th South and 9400 South, and in between 1000 East and 1300 East. It's a mixed-use development, it's about 106 acres. There's a combination of retail, residential, and a park with a trail system all around it. Some of the retail that's there is, there's a Lowe's, there's a Super Walmart, and there's a lot of retail shops that are along the front of it there that has banks and restaurants and all your typical shops, Verizon, small shops, whatnot. And then there's apartments that are in that development. And then there's townhomes, and then there's like an 8-acre city park that they use for softball and soccer. It was a really exciting, very challenging project because there was about 6 developers involved with that project, and we were designing all of it, running that through the city process. It was a challenge from the city's perspective and some of the citizens that kind of lived around that area, because at one point in time, they were told that they were going to get a 106-acre park there. But the city didn't own that land. It was owned by a private entity. And so I guess the residents that were adjacent to that property always thought, hey, we're going to get this 106-acre park here, and it didn't come to fruition with them. So it was a long entitlement process. It actually went to a referendum, which means that the Sandy citizens actually got to vote on to whether that project was going to become a reality or not. Unfortunately, the citizens did choose and elect for that project to move forward. So they didn't get a 106-acre park. They got about an 8-acre park with a trail system. But if you can imagine all of the revenues that come from those retail shops that go directly to the city, and then the additional housing that it provided. It's a great project.
I had a quick question on that. Private entity owns it. Why in the world do the citizens do it?
So there was a petition that went out, and they got enough signatures on that petition that ultimately went to a referendum. We're starting to see more and more of that. Another one that just recently came through was is if anybody's familiar with the old Cottonwood Mall there in Salt Lake, they're trying to redevelop that and do a mix similar to what we did in Quarry Bend. It went to a referendum and the citizens declined. And so they've got to go back and figure out what they can do to make the citizens happy.
All right. Oh,
Quick follow-up. So with the Safe Pathways project that you were working on, Elizabeth, where did the funding come from that? Was that like the cities? Was it county?
So in California, there's certain grants for active transportation programs, projects. So yeah, part of it is from grant funding from federal, state, city level. That's where most of those like public kind of projects tend to be funded from.
What would you suggest is the best way to network?
The best way to network. I would say just kind of go out there and attend your meetings. I will admit, when I was in your shoes, I did not like attending networking events. But I would say partner up if you have a friend or if you have like a faculty advisor, someone that you trust. Kind of go together. And then, yeah, it eventually gets better. You know, everyone's a human. They like to talk. They like to get to know you and get to know each other, and it gets better over time.
And, you know, sometimes it's hard to get out of your comfort zone, but in reality, people are going to those networking events to network. So it's just that change of mindset. Hey, everybody's here to network. So, you know, you might not have somebody coming up to you to talk. You need to take the lead and go find somebody to talk to. So.
All right, I guess that's it. Well, thank you guys for attending, and then also we hope to see you guys next week during our expo session.
Yeah, we were planning to use that guy, but it wouldn't, oh, please. You're so funny.